Hi everybody, welcome to our live knitting event. My name is Brenda KB Anderson. I'm a knitting instructor and also a designer, and today I want to share with you this project. It is called the Roseheart Inlay Headband. This is what it looks like here. It's got a little knot in the front, and then it has this really beautiful motif on each side of the headband that looks a lot like embroidery. But it's not done like embroidery. It's also not done with actual knit stitches, but it is something that you create as you are knitting this project. So this is a very unusual technique. It's fairly new to me, but it's been around for a while. It's an Estonian technique called Roseheart. And so it's basically it's kind of like a little closer to weaving, I feel like, than to actual knitting. Although we will be knitting in stockinette stitch the headband as we are weaving these colors through it. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this step by step. This project is definitely approachable for, I would say, like a beginner with a little bit of experience. Like, you should be very comfortable holding onto the needles and comfortable, hanging onto the yarn. Also, we are going to be working this up on a circular needle. So I'm using this very small, like very short circular needle. This is a 12-inch circular needle. It's, normally if you go to like a yarn store, well, they probably would have these at a yarn store, but if you go to a craft store, a big box store, that type of thing, and you're looking for knitting needles, it's harder to find these 12-inch ones. Normally the shortest size that you see that's like readily available everywhere is like the 16-inch ones. So this is a little bit shorter than that. So I did put a link in the download in case you guys are interested in exactly what this one is. If you're interested in purchasing it or just want to see up close what this one is. This is the one I'm going to be using, but just know that you can do this on double point needles. You could do it with 2 circular needles. You could do it with what is it called? Magic loop? Okay, now I'm forgetting my terms, where you pull out the loop of your circular needle and then you work across. You can use any technique that you'd like, for doing something that's a small circumference working in the round. And if you're like, hey, whoa, wait, pump the brakes, Brenda, I've never done that before, I haven't worked in the round, I'm going to be showing you how to do it. If you are able to get a needle like this, it's going to make this project easier just because you won't have to deal with, it's just very smooth sailing. You're just knitting around in a tube. This is the perfect size for it. It's just going to kind of take away any of the little fiddliness. So I would recommend, if you're able, for a newer knitter to grab one of these smaller circular needles, because you'll just see as I start knitting it up, as we start working in the technique, it just kind of takes any of the sort of fiddliness out of the project, and then you can focus on the Roseheart technique. All right, so let's talk about, we're going to first talk a little bit more about the materials you're going to need here. There is a download that is free, and in this download is the full pattern with all the instructions that you need, plus there's like a photo tutorial of the technique itself, excuse me, the Roseheart technique that we're going to be using to make the motif. So I have a bunch of photos in here with basically walking you through the first couple rounds of working in this technique. And I feel like that's just it would be nice to have the video plus also the pattern to look at, just to kind of make sure everything's making sense. You can see up close in the pictures exactly what is going on, but I'll be showing you all the steps as well. And I feel like it's very helpful to see something in action like in these videos. That's why I love teaching in the video format so much. So you can go ahead and download that pattern. Also, so you're going to need the pattern. Also, you're going to need the pattern for the charts in it in order to make the motif. And then as far as materials go, you'll need somewhere between, let's see, 120 and 158 yards. So that's 110 or 145 meters of a worsted weight yarn. So that's the main color of the headband. That's this sort of off-white kind of color here, or ecru, or the lighter color. And then you're going to need basically just scrap balls of yarn for the inlay technique, for the motif that we're going to be creating. So here I have, and probably only like really about 15 yards of each color is what you'll need. It doesn't take a lot. And then one thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have 2 balls of each of those colors. So these should also be worsted weight as well. It is possible, here, let me just pull this in here so you guys can actually see what this looks like. So what's happening here is we have strands of yarn that are being wrapped around our knit stitches as we're creating them. And so if you're working this up in a worsted weight yarn and you want to, normally I will also use worsted weight yarn for the Rosamina technique as well for the colors, but I would use that doubled. And the reason that I really like doing that is because when you double it, it has more coverage, it covers a wider area, and the two strands kind of sit next to each other like this when you're wrapping the yarn around your stitches. I have seen people using just a thicker yarn, and you can absolutely do that. You can use a heavier weight like a chunky or maybe a bulky weight. You might just have to do a little bit of experimentation. I have used that before, but I do prefer using two strands of the worsted weight because I feel like it lays a little flatter because they're gonna lay like side by side and just be a little bit flatter on top of your project. So it's up to you, but this is a great project for just finding scraps that you already own, you know, in colors that look good together. They don't have to be these colors, of course. You know, you can just experiment and do something, you know, just colors that kind of go together. So I would definitely recommend doing a little stash diving before you work on this project, so that way you can just use what you already have. All right, so in order to prep these, you're going to need to separate them. If you're using a worsted weight yarn for this technique, you're gonna separate them into 2 balls of each of those colors. Okay, so you just need little amounts in 2 balls of each color. So we'll have that. I already talked about the needle. This is a US size 8, which is 5mm circular needle. It's 12 inches. And again, I do have a link for this if you want to see up close exactly what this needle is, because those 12-inch needles aren't quite as prevalent as the 16 or longer needles. And also another thing that I just wanted to point this out, another reason that I really love having this needle, and actually what I bought it for in the first place, is I really like to make tube scarves. I did a live event where I talked about just knitting for calming, you know, just the benefits of kind of the soothing rhythmic knitting. And I really like doing the knit stitch and just working in the round, not turning rows, not doing purls, just knit in a spiral. And so that's actually why I bought this, because it's like the perfect size for a scarf if you make it as a tube, which I really like doing. So just in case you're interested in that, I'm trying to remember the name of that event, but it was for Craftsy, and I just talked about, I made 2 different scarves, a crochet one and a knit one, and I just talked about, you know, basically how I use knitting and crocheting to help keep me calm and to kind of relax me. Yeah, so anyway, just in case you're like, will I ever use that needle again, Brenda? I don't know if I want to buy that. I'm not saying you have to buy it. You can certainly use double point needles to circular needles or the magic loop method to work in the round. That's actually, you know, that's a very good option as well. And then, you know, especially if you already have those needles, you don't have to worry about it. As far as the rest of the materials, it's just, you'll just need a yarn needle. For this project, I actually prefer to have a yarn needle with a little bit of a sharper point to it. It's not essential. You don't need to go out and get a different needle if you don't already have one like this, but if you do have one, it just helps to kind of secure those ends in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you're gonna need 2 stitch markers, or you can use little sections of yarn, your bobby pins, safety pins, whatever. And actually, I find that I don't even need these later on, but especially for newer knitters, this might help you this will help you keep track of where you are, especially when you're working those chart rounds. So have 2 stitch markers. They don't have to be locking markers like these. This is just what I have. They can just be the regular like plastic circle ones. That works great too. But you just need 2 of those, and that's it. So not a lot of materials here, which is great. And some of those materials are probably things you already have, which is also great. Okay, so we're just gonna start out by casting on 40 stitches, and you can use any cast on method you want. It doesn't have to stretch, it doesn't have to look perfect, because the cast on is actually going to be hidden in the seam of the knot, like in the front of the headband, so any cast on method is great. For a long tail cast on or German tail cast on, I would pull out at least 1.5 yards for your long tail, because later on it'll just be nice to have that extra length or some extra length for seaming that knot together at the end. So, Okay, so in case you need a little refresher on casting on, this is just one of the many ways you can cast on. So you just place a slip knot on your needle, and you can hold your yarn in a slingshot position. Here I have the yarn connected to the ball back here, kind of on the back side of my needle, and then just the yarn tail end on the front side right here, and then I'm going to hold that around my finger and my thumb and kind of hold all those little ends together. And then I just go underneath here by my thumb and then over the top of the strand that's under my finger, pull it through the window and drop it off. So go underneath, over the top, pull it through, drop it off. Underneath, over the top, pull it through, drop it off. Okay, so you can go ahead and cast on your 40 stitches, any method you like. And I will just shift over here to my needle that already has 40 stitches on it. So, and you can also start with your first round. We're going to be working in stockinette. We're just making a very basic knitted tube here. So you can do any method you like. You can join, you can add that extra stitch and make it a perfect join. I'm just going to start knitting with it because we're never going to see this edge. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. So I've got, here, let me just lay this down. I've got the needle with both strands of yarn coming out. Here's the yarn that's connected to my ball. I can tell that these are not twisted. They're just laying flat on the table. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick them up like this. And I'm going to just start knitting. So I'm going to take my right needle and just go ahead and make that first knit stitch and pull on that yarn to cinch it up, and then go ahead and just start knitting around. So you'll notice I'm a continental knitter. I'm a picker, not a thrower, but I have been working on being a thrower because I know a lot of you guys knit the English style where you're wrapping the yarn. So you would hold the yarn in your right hand, insert your needle through that loop, wrap the yarn, pull it through, just in case you need a little refresher. I wanted to make this accessible to people who haven't had a lot of knitting experience yet, or haven't done it in a while, because this technique, you really don't. The technique is basically something I've never done before. It's unlike other types of color work or embroidery, and so you don't really need to have any background in that, in color work or anything like that. You just need to be able to make very basic knit stitches. All right, so you're just going to continue knitting around in your tube, and your pattern will tell you how many rounds to complete, anywhere between 17 and 20 something maybe. Let's just look. Because there are different sizes for the headband, that's why I'm telling you to go by what your pattern says. Here, we're going to skip ahead for the instructions. These are all the step-by-step how to work in the Rosamina technique. Okay, so you're either knitting 17 rounds, 20, 23, or 26, just depending on the size of your headband, because it goes from anywhere, should have mentioned that earlier, anywhere from 18 inches to 24-inch heads, okay? So, and let's see, and the headbands themselves measure just about 1/2 inch smaller than your head, like the targeted head size, basically, if that makes sense. It is a little, it is stretchy, but it's not like wildly stretchy. So you'll probably want a size that's pretty close to your head size, or just, up to 1 inch or so smaller. All right, so you're gonna continue just doing the knit stitch around and around. Actually, I'll do one complete round so you can see what happens when we get all the way back to the beginning. So just for those of you who are a little newer to knitting, and I know, before I actually tried this technique, I just found it so hard to believe that you're actually just knitting with one color the whole time and you're not exchanging things. You're not, this is very different from Fair Isle or Intarsia or any other kind of knitted color work, or even, it's not, even slip stitch or mosaic knitting. That's very different from all of these things. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of our round, and we just keep on going. Okay, so you're just going to keep going around and around and around. And the first couple rounds are a little bit awkward, you know, just because there's not much to hang on to, and it just seems to stick a little bit more. But once you get in the rhythm, it'll get a little bit quicker, especially on these if you're using a circular needle like these. All right, so we're going to skip ahead here. So this is after working 17 rounds. So this would be for the smallest size headband here. And, or actually I've worked 16 rounds. So on our last round, before we start the technique, we're just going to place those stitch markers. So that way we can keep track of where we're going to be making those motifs on our piece. Okay, so we're going to be placing them between stitches 25 and 26. So I should mention all of the sizes for this headband, they all have the same width, they're just not the same circumference. Okay, so all of the numbers I'm telling you here, those are going to be the same no matter what size you're working on. So we've got, after 25, we'll place the stitch markers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So between 25 and 26, oh, sorry, that was incorrect. Between 14 and 15 and 25 and 26. I missed the first stitch marker. So we would just knit up to 14, place the stitch marker, then we continue with stitch 15, and I should have realized that. But I'm gonna, because I have these locking stitch markers, I could just go ahead and throw mine in there. So I'm gonna count backwards from 20, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. So between 14 and 15, should go right here. Okay, so let's count our stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Let me see if I place those correctly. Okay, yes, because in our chart, here's what the Rosamina chart looks like. We've got 11 stitches going across. So basically we put a stitch marker here and a stitch marker here, and that's gonna basically prompt us like, oh, hey, this is this part I have to pay attention and do the inlay technique right here between those two markers. All right, so once you get to that first marker, then you're gonna stop and work on your Rosamine technique as you are making your stitches. So we're just gonna finish the end of the round, and we're gonna get back around to that first stitch marker that we placed. So I'm just gonna knit my way over there right now. So in the meantime, while I'm knitting, you can see, just take a look at this chart. So there are basically like just a line going through some squares, or they're really rectangles to show the proportions of the knit stitches. But those lines going through, those are showing where there are strands of yarn going across the front of your work. And that's gonna be where, you know, where the detail shows up on the outside of your piece. Getting a little close to that stitch marker, and then we're going to start working on this inlay technique here. And because I knit from right to left, we're going to be reading our chart from right to left as well. If you were knitting from left to right, you'd read your chart from left to right. In this case, it doesn't matter because our chart is completely symmetrical from side to side, so it doesn't make a difference. But so I'm going to be starting here on my chart on the very bottom row. So we're going to start with row number 1, or round number 1. And you can see there's 2 white squares. That just means we're just knitting them just like normal. Okay, so we're going to slip that marker, and here we are in our little section where we're knitting, and we're going to knit 2. So 1 and 2. And right now, here's where we are. We've just knit these 2 stitches, and now you can see there's a red bar going across 3 stitches. So there's 1, 2, and 3 squares here with that red bar that's just drawn across it. So that means we're going to be adding our red. So we're going to grab 2 strands of our red, and we are just going to start by laying our red from so that the ends of your yarn are going towards the wrong side of your work, and you're going to just lay it in there between your needles, just like this. And you just need enough yarn tail so that you can weave it in later. So just going to let that hang to the back. In fact, I'm going to just kind of pull it down inside here just to kind of get it out of the way. And we're going to ignore it now. So it's just hanging out there, and we're going to do 1, 2, 3 stitches, okay? So even though it's red, it's showing in red here, we're still knitting with the same color. I know that this seems kind of crazy, especially if you've done other color work before, but just you gotta trust the process here. So we're gonna knit 1, 2, and 3, okay? And now we're going to take our 2 strands and we're gonna bring them between our needles to the wrong side. And when you do this, especially if you have 2 strands of yarn like I do, just make sure those 2 strands are flat and they're not all twisted around each other like that. So you're just gonna bring it back, and this, your working yarn should cross over that color on top, okay? You shouldn't be just setting that on top of your work and knitting like this, okay? That red needs to go between your needles and to the wrong side, and then you're going to grab that yarn that you're working with. This is the yarn we're going to knit with the entire time, no matter what we're doing with all the color stuff. We're still only going to be making stitches in this color. So that needs to come across the top of the red, and then we're going to go ahead and knit 1 stitch, because there's 1 stitch in white right here. So we're going to knit that stitch, and you can see when we did that, it trapped our yarn. It's trapped in there now. And as you were working in this technique, you just have to kind of be like adjusting your yarn just so that it lays flat. You don't want it to be tight. Right now it can't really be tight because this can still slide back and forth. We haven't really done much with it yet, so it could still move a little bit, but so don't worry about it too much, and you can always adjust things later. If you don't, it's good to keep up on adjusting and making sure that those strands are laying flat and that they're not all twisted up, but don't sweat it too much because you can do a lot of adjusting later. All right, so we've knit that 1 white stitch, which is right here, and you can see there's 3 more in red. So that means we're going to take the red and we're going to bring it back to the front, and actually we want to do that underneath that strand. So the strand is going to stay on the top. I like to just hold it out of the way, bring it back between the needles to the front of our work, and now we're going to knit 3 more stitches because there's 3 stitches in red. We're still using that same color, and we're going to knit 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, just like that. And then we're going to move that out of the way, bring the red yarn back between the needles to the wrong side, and then we're going to knit those last 2 stitches of our chart. So 1 and 2. All right, so now you can see we've got a little strand here and a little strand here of the colors, and it looks pretty much like that. Same thing. All right, so now we can go ahead and just knit our way around until we get to that first stitch marker over here again. So we're just going to be doing knit stitches, just letting that red yarn just hang out on the wrong side as we work our way around. I'm just going to check in to see if there's any comments or questions. Oh, Jeanette is saying it was hard for me to learn this. Okay, well, I hope that this video is going to help. I really love teaching through video because sometimes there just are not enough words to explain something on a piece of paper, and it really just helps to see something being formed, It's just, and then you can, I kind of talk a lot and try to explain all the things that I'm thinking about as I do these tutorials, because I feel like it really does help especially when you're first learning things. Sometimes you know, you don't know where you're supposed to hold on to something, or little tips and tricks to make things easier, it's just easier to talk about those kinds of things on video. Otherwise, if you wrote it in a pattern or some sort of a tutorial, like nobody's gonna wanna read all that. Even if you absolutely love reading about knitting, I feel like there's a point where it's just too much to read. So, all right, so we've worked our way around to that first stitch. We've got a lot of hellos coming in from all over the place. So Jeanette from Ohio, Quartz Hill from Northern California, Robin from Raleigh, North Carolina, and Beverly from Elbert, Colorado, near Colorado Springs. I've been there. It's a lovely place. And Jean is saying, greetings from Northeast Iowa. Hi everybody. Thank you guys so much for saying hi. Oh, and Babette is from Southwest Michigan. That is a place I go a lot, actually, because I have family there. Okay, so we have made it all the way around to that first knitting, or to that first stitch marker. Okay, so I slipped the marker, and now we're going to be working on row number two of our chart. So we're going to knit the first stitch. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then you'll notice here we have just that beginning yarn that's going to be woven in later. I'm tucking that out of the way. And here's our ending yarn. So you might think, well, what the heck? How am I supposed to knit that when it's way over here, right? Am I supposed to cut it off? Do I have to weave in all these ends? No. This is the coolest part about this whole process. It seems completely counterintuitive to do this little section here, but it'll, like, as you do it a few times, it'll start to make sense to you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this, bring it across the front, and we are going to place it between our needles so that we can have a strand of yarn on the front side and make these 2 stitches. Now you might be thinking, well, that's crazy. I don't want to loop on the front of my project, but don't worry, it's not going to hang out there forever. Okay, so we just brought it. I'll just show you that one more time. So it ended over here. We're just going to make a loop and bring it between the needles and bring it to the back over here. And this loop, you don't have to be super careful about how big this is because you can easily adjust this as you're working on stuff. It'll just slip through your stitches, so don't worry too much. I just like to have, you know, a nice little swoop going on there so I know, you know, that it's not going to be, I'm not going to run out of yarn and have to tug on it as I'm partway through my row, which it isn't a big deal, but you know, you'll start to learn as you do this. All right, so we're going to knit the next 2 stitches still in that same color throughout this whole project, but they're red. So we're going to knit 2, and then you can see that there's a pink stitch right after here. So we're going to be changing our yarn out for pink in just a minute. So we're going to knit those 2 stitches. So knit 1, knit 2, and then we're going to bring that loop. See how this is the loop side? We're going to be bringing that back between our needles to the back. So that's going to be wrapping those 2 stitches right there. And then before we knit the next stitch, we have to add pink. So we're going to grab our pink yarn. And we've got 2 strands of our pink yarn. We're going to start this just like before. Anytime you have to start a new little section of, you know, of a different color, you're just going to tuck it between your needles like this and let it hang to the back of your work, and you'll just be weaving that in later. So just let it hang out. And again, we're going to make sure that the yarn we're knitting with is crossing over the top. So you always switch your yarn from the front to the back or the back to the front, or whatever you're doing with those inlay yarns, those contrasting yarns, and making sure that this is not trapped underneath them when you do that. Okay, so we're going to set this across, and we're going to knit 1 stitch. So we're knitting that stitch. And then we're going to bring the pink yarn to the back because we're just doing 1 stitch. That's the end of the pink. And then right after the pink, we're going to be doing red. Now, this is all written out in your pattern. I do have a reminder about this, but anytime you're going from one color directly to the next and there's no white in between, like if these were 2 different colors, if there was a white stitch, it wouldn't matter so much. But when you're switching from one color to another color right next to each other, that means you're interchanging 2 colors in the same space between your needles, okay? When you do that, you have to be consistent about which color you move first. So for this entire chart, this is the chart for the first motif, right? Our chart, we're working from Basically our chart, it looks like it's upside down, but we're working from the top of our rose heart thing down through the stem, right? As we're doing that, we're always going to be switching our red yarn first and then our pink yarn. And I'll talk a little more about this as I do this, so it'll make more sense. But I just want you to know that's going to be different when we get to the opposite end of our headband, because our chart is going to be right side up. And in order for these to really look like each other, then we're going to have to move our pink yarns first and then move our red. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. I'm just going to point this out a couple of times as I'm working on it. But I just want you to know that it does matter which color you move first. Okay, so we have knitted the stitch behind this pink strand here, and now we want to switch from pink to red. So like I said before, on this chart, every time we're switching between two colors, this only happens between the pink and the red. Once we get up to the green, we don't need to worry about it. But in this section here on the first motif, which is the one we're doing now, we're going to be moving the red first. Okay, so I'm going to move the red first, and then I'm going to move the pink. And so let me show you the reason why this matters. As you are interchanging the two colors, one has to sit on top of the other. If you look straight down on this, you can see the pink is sitting on top of the red because we moved the red first. So that's going to be pushing that little strand of pink up just barely above the red. Let me show you what it actually looks like here. Let's see, maybe this side is a little more clear. Well, this would be the beginning. Right here, I'm going to just move this out of the way so that we can kind of focus on this little section. Here, I'll fold this back. There we go. If you look beneath my finger here, this was the row number 1. We just did those 2 long red strands. Row number 2 of the rosamine, we've got red, pink, red, pink, red. We're switching back and forth. The red, you can see the red is just barely below that little pink dash right here. It's because one yarn has to sit on top of the other. And if we didn't care about that, these little lines might end up crooked, or they might not be symmetrical from side to side. If we just didn't care which one we move first, they might end up just like, this pink might be underneath the red over here, but on top of the red on this side. And by on top, I just mean further away from my body right here. So the red is just sitting ever so slightly lower, the pink is sitting ever so slightly higher. So that's the reason that it matters whether you're moving the dark color first or the light color first. As long as you're consistent throughout, it actually doesn't matter which one you move first, but I tell you instructions on which one to move first in your pattern just because I feel like that's easier. You can always go back and be like, which one was I moving first? And then you can look at the pattern and it'll tell you. Okay, so we moved the red one first and moved the pink one second. And now we're ready to do these 3 knit stitches for the red stripe, because the red's on the outside right now. So we're going to go knit, knit, knit. And now we're right here. So we just did knit, 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 and now we're going to exchange the red for the pink, right? And we're moving the red one first. So we're going to move the 2 strands of red. Remember, this is just that loop that we've been knitting, basically, or not knitting, but moving back and forth. So we're going to move that between the needles. Red goes first, and then the pink is going to go second. So we're going to bring that out. Okay, so now we have the pink on the outside, and we can knit that one pink stitch shown in the chart. And then we're going to, again, exchange the pink for the red. So because we're exchanging pink for red, remember, your instinct might be to go, oh, okay, this is on the outside, now we're going to, but we have to remember, we're going to move the red first, red to the outside, and then we move the pink second, okay? So this only matters when you're exchanging one color for the next color, and they're crossing, they're both going between the needles at the same time, if that makes sense. All right, so now we're going to do 2 stitches because there's 2 stitches that are wrapped in the red. So 1 and 2. And then we're going to bring that red back to the inside. So we just bring that loop between the needles to the back. And then we're just going to knit that last stitch of the chart, which is right here. It's just a white stitch. And now let's take a look at what we have. You know, it's looking like our chart, and maybe now you can see how the pink ones are sitting just slightly above where the red ones are. And this does look a little messy here. It's a little loopy here. Every time you do a row, you can kind of adjust right at the end and very gently pull on your yarn to kind of straighten out any extra loops. Like you can see, this is just loose here. So you'll find the end, and remember, this was our loop here, and you might be thinking, well, I don't want a loop there. That's okay. We are going to adjust that by pulling on the beginning tail of our yarn, and we're going to, that's going to pull. Now watch these stitches here, or not stitches, but watch those wraps. They're going to just shift. Okay, and we'll do that until this loop disappears. There, a loop just disappeared. I'll show you that again on the next time we go around. So you just kind of pull on that, and then just make sure you pull on this, just so that that's not going to be like restricting the stretch. It doesn't need to stretch this way, but you just don't want it to be puckering your fabric. Okay, so you just have to do a little adjustment. You just kind of look on the inside and say, oh, is there any, you know, loops hanging out? Like looks a little bit long here in the pink, so I'm just going to pull on that just a little. You just want it to be touching the fabric and not a loose loop. Just strand it across and not loose. All right, that just fell off, so I'm going to add that back on. All right, so now we're going to knit our way around the back until we get to the next set of markers. And if you're thinking, oh, this just seems really complicated, once you do a few rounds of it, it will like click and it'll make sense. It is a very unusual technique, so it's, you know, I'm explaining a lot of things here, but when you have it in front of you and you do a few rounds of it, it's going to make more sense. Let's see. Belle says, hi Brenda, just wondering how you would use 2 circular needles to make this if I don't own a short one. Okay, so what I do with 2 circular needles is, if they're the same, you know, if they're both 8s, size 8 or 5mm, you can have 1 circular needle going through here, you know, from the halfway point. You can just find, you know, a stitch on the side basically and run your circular needle through the front, and then you have another circular needle running through the back. And because they'll be longer than, you know, this type of circular needle, they'll be sticking out of the side. So just imagine you've got 2 circular needles running all the way through. So then you can use the back circular needle to knit across the front all those stitches and pull that through, and then you turn your work, and then you switch to using what now became the back needle to knit across what's now facing you again. So it's, you basically just have two needle tips hanging out here and 2 hanging out here. You just have to find that halfway point. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just gonna be nice to have this whole section all on 1 needle, so you don't have to switch in the middle, if that makes sense. And I'm sure there's I'm sure there's a video on the knitting circle, so that you can, you know, see this in action. Sorry, it's just a little bit. I'm trying to think if I have a way to show that. I feel like I could maybe later, if I have time, I'll try and show that with my short circular needles. It's going to be a little bit weird because they're shorter, but I think that it'll still work. Okay, so we're going to be knitting our way across, and we're going to stop at that stitch marker. Let's see, and we've got a question from Robin. Instead of 2 strands of colored yarn together, could you use a single strand of bulky yarn? Yes, you can. What I was saying before, I do prefer using 2 strands of the worsted just because it seems to lay a little flatter, but you can absolutely use the bulky yarn. It's only just like a little personal preference for me. Also, I have more worsted weight yarn to choose from than I have from my bulky yarn, but you can absolutely use bulky yarn. You can just start on this and see, you know, wrap your yarn across those stitches and just see if it covers up most of the stitch, then you're good to go. Or you could use 3 strands of a thinner yarn. There's a lot of things that you can do, because this is not actually really changing your gauge or anything, because you're not actually knitting with these yarns, you're just using them to cover up some of your stitches. It just kind of lays across. You're just wrapping those stitches. So you can get away with, you know, changing the thickness of your yarn. As long as you like how it looks, then you're good. Yeah. Oh, and we have a hello from Frisco, Texas. Kay is excited to try this. Awesome. And a hello from India from Jaya Kumar. Awesome. Hi. I love hearing where everybody is from. It's very cool that we can all get together and knit from all over the world. It's very cool. Okay, so I'm going to just slip that stitch marker to the right, and now we're going to be working across row number 3. So you can see here we're going to be starting with 2 reds. So we've got to bring our red to the front, and see now, because last time we did that loop, brought our yarn over, our yarn now ends over here and it's ready to go. So we're just going to bring that between the needles like that, and we're going to go ahead and knit 2 stitches because there's 2 in red here. So we're going to go knit and knit. And now we're going to exchange the red for the pink, okay? So remember, we're going to move the red first and move the pink second. So I'm going to just pull that out of the way. We're going to move the red first between the needles to the back, and then we're going to move the pink second. And if you look in here, you'll see our pink is over here at the end, right? Because we just used it on the last row and knit, brought it all the way across. So here it is. So again, we're going to just bring that to the front, make a little loop, and cross it over. Okay, so that's sitting on top of the red. And then we're going to knit 1, 2, 3 in behind the pink. So 1, 2, 3. And then here we're going to exchange the pink for the red. We're going to do 1 little stitch that's wrapped in red. Okay, so we're exchanging the pink for the red, but remember we have to move the red first. So here's our red. We're going to bring that to the front between our needles, and then we're going to bring the pink to the back because we're moving the pink second, just like that. And then we're going to go ahead and knit 1 stitch. Then we're going to exchange for the red for the pink. So we're going to bring the red to the back as we move the red first. And then we're going to move the pink second, just like that. And we're going to knit 1, 2, 3 stitches behind the pink. So 1, 2, 3. We're going to bring the pink to the, we're exchanging pink for red. So we still have to move the red first. So we're going to move the red to the front because we moved that first, and then move the pink to the back. And we're going to knit 2 stitches, 1 and 2. I always just move that working yarn away. So maybe if you're an English knitter and you're holding it in your right hand, that might be a little bit just a little bit easier for you. So we're going to bring the red to the back because here we are at the end of row number 3 of the chart. The red just comes right between the needles to the back, and then we can go ahead and slip that stitch marker and knit our way around until we get to that first stitch marker. So when you're doing this, you're laying those yarns, just do it kind of loosely. I always, let it be fairly loose, and then after I knit a couple of stitches here, I take a look at what's going on the back. I see if there's any extra loops. Here's a loop of the pink, so we're going to go ahead and pull on this part of the pink, and you can watch that loop disappear. Just like that. You don't want to pull anything tight because when it's tight, then it just doesn't look as nice. It doesn't cover as much of the strands behind, but also it starts to restrict your work and it puckers a little bit. And then we're going to take a look at the red, see if we need to tighten that at all. This looks a little loose right here, this little stitch, or not stitch, but that wrap there. So we're going to go ahead and just pull on this, kind of tighten that up. Pull on that, just to make sure everything is even. And then we're going to keep on going. So we're going to knit all the way around to that first stitch marker. So let me know if you guys are having any questions about what we're doing, if this is making sense. Of course, you can always come back and watch the video and check it out. Let's see, we're almost all the way around to that first stitch marker. And we're going to be doing round number 4 here. I'm going to slip that stitch marker. And round 4, we've got 2 stitches in the red. So we're going to, I'm moving that out of the way, and I'm going to bring the red. The red is now at the right. It's right here. So we're going to make that loop across the front and just let it hang out. Okay, it's just going to be hanging out while we make our 2 stitches. Remember that working yarn has to cross over there, that contrasting yarn. So we've got 2 knit stitches here, and then we're going to exchange the red for pink. Okay, so we got to move the red first, moving the red to the back. Then we need to move the pink to the front, and our pink is right here. So we're going to bring that through to the front. And we're going to do 1 stitch behind that pink strand. So 1 stitch. And then you can see there's a white stitch here. So we're going to just bring that pink to the back. There's no red to move at that point. And then we're going to do 1 stitch in white. And then we're going to bring the pink to the front because we need it again. So here's the pink coming between the needles to the front. And then we're going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to bring the pink to the back. There's no red to move at that point. Bringing the pink to the back. We're going to do 1 stitch. And then we're going to bring the pink to the front. And then we're going to do 1 stitch. And then here, we're going to trade it in for the red. So we have to move the red. We also have to move the pink. So we're going to be moving the red before we move the pink. Okay, and so when you're working on projects like this, if it seems like there's a very long float across the back, you can cut your yarn, leaving a long tail so that you can use that color over on this side. And if there's a big gap between where you're using it over here and where you're using it on here, you can actually have 2 different sections going on at the same time. And this might be something you would consider if you're ever going to see the back side of your piece, or if it's something that needs to have a little bit of stretch to it and you really don't want to have those floats like restricting the work. Normally these projects would be made with a very fine yarn, smaller scale, maybe fingering weight. And so the floats are not really that long. Even for something like this, the floats would be shorter because the whole motif would be smaller. But we're doing this in a worsted weight just so that we can kind of make it a little easier to see, make it a little easier to hang on to, just to be learning this. And so it just, just think about if you don't want that long float, you can always start another little section over here. You can cut your yarn, let it hang out, cut enough so that you can still work with it on this side of your motif, and then add that same color over here just by laying it between the needles. Like anytime you start a new section of color, you just lay it between the needles. I'm not going to cut my yarn, even though this is kind of a long space from this section all the way across, because it's going to be completely hidden on the inside. We're making a tube here. You're never ever going to see the wrong side of that. So having a section where there's strands coming across here, that's not going to bother me because it's going to be completely hidden on the inside of this headband. That's another reason I designed it this way, just so that we'd be knitting a tube, you'd never see the wrong side of it, especially for your first project using this technique. I just feel like you don't want to have to worry about how neat and tidy the back looks while you're exchanging your colors and you're learning how to do this. So I'm going to just be bringing this color back through what we want to make sure that's on top. We're just going to be bringing the color back on through, and you'll see that that's creating a long float from there to there. That doesn't bother me. Like I said, it's going to be hidden. We just have to make sure that this is not going to be constricting our motif at all as we knit. So we brought that to the front first. Now we're going to bring the pink to the back, and we're going to go ahead and knit 2 stitches. So 1 and 2. Then we're going to bring that red to the back. Okay, remember that's just our loop. We're just bringing it to the back there. And we're gonna go ahead, slip that marker, and knit a couple of stitches. Okay, so that everything's in place. We can take a look at what we have so far. And we can go ahead and tighten up anything if we have like, a long loop like this. We've got that loop hanging out, then we just take the other end of it and gently pull on it until that loop disappears, watching over here. And we want to make sure this isn't too tight. And we'll take a look at how the front looks. This looks just a little tight here, so I'm going to loosen that up. But it looks pretty good on that side. Okay, and then we'll just take a look at our pink just to make sure it's laying flat and isn't constricting anything, and it looks good. All right, so then we can keep on going. So you would just, this is really it, you guys. So you just, when you're swapping one yarn for another, just remember you're always going to be swapping one color every single time. One color moves first, the second color moves second throughout that whole motif. Then when we start working the other end of the headband, because this is a long tube, see one heart flower is upside down, then it's right side up. When we start working the second one, we have to switch swap which color goes on the bottom and which color goes on the top, because one of these is upside down. So that way when you look at them together, they will have the same appearance, okay, as each other. That's why we do that. But just in case you're like, oh, I don't quite understand that, that's okay. I do have like a little prompt in your pattern saying, make sure you move the red first and then move the pink, on the section for the first chart. And then on the second chart, make sure you move the pink first and then you move the red. Okay, and so really the only other thing I wanted to talk about with this chart is, once you move along here, then you'll notice on row number 10 here, or for round number 10, we've got green here, red here, green here. So all you need to do is just start a new strand with the green. That's how we started it anytime. You just put it between the needles, wrap it across, and then you're just going to be stitching it with, all the yarns to the back at this point when you're working through here, and then you can still kind of grab the red from down here, drop that. And then if you don't want to strand on the back side of your work, if you don't want to strand all the way from here to here, which is pretty far, and I felt like that was just a little too far, I just added a second section of green over here. Okay, and then once you do round number 10, you're only using one color, and here we're not jumping between our float on the outside here. There's only 3 stitches, and then we have another float on the outside. So really, from this point onward, you can just use one strand of green yarn. You can just kind of let those hang out, those ends hang out in there. When I'm working on this type of project, I really like to, after I've been working for a ways, I really like to go back in and just weave in my ends before it gets too far, especially because this is a tube, and that way I never have to turn the whole thing inside out, which you totally can. But also, I don't really love weaving in ends, so it helps me if I just weave them in as I'm completing a section. Like once I've finished the section where I'm done with all the red and the pink, I will stop and just kind of pull it like this and go ahead and weave in my ends. And then I will continue with the green. Once I finish that section of green, I will weave in my ends, okay? So I just want to show you why it is that I like having the sharper needle. So when you weave in your ends, they're really, you don't really want to weave it into the fabric very much because you don't want it to show on the outside. So it's best to just kind of snag the yarn floats that are on the inside, especially if it's the same color or color nearby. So I like using these sharper needles because I can kind of splice through the yarn a little bit. Like I'm actually going through the inside of the yarn, the core of the yarn, to kind of make it have a little more friction, and so it'll stay in place instead of just tucking it under a couple of strands. And then when I do that, I will place my thumb here just to keep these loops from distorting or pulling too much. So I'm going to place my thumb on top as I'm pulling the needle through. And you never want to pull too hard. You just want to pull it through barely. Like there's a little bit of a loop there. I'm just pulling it through until that loop pretty much goes away. And really for this piece, because this is a wool yarn that I'm using here, and there's, it's going to be completely hidden in the back, there's not going to be really any reason for that to undo itself. I'm just going to cut it off right there and let it hang out on the inside. Normally I weave in my ends back and forth in a couple of directions, but I feel like that's not necessary on this project. So the reason I like using those sharper needles is so you can really splice through the yarn. You can still do that with the blunt tip needle. It just makes it a little bit easier. Or if you're using a yarn to make these floats across the front and it's not a yarn, like maybe it's a one ply or something that you really don't want to run your needle through, that's okay. You can just kind of go underneath some strands in one direction, underneath some strands in another direction. You can even go under just a little, grab just a little bit of that main color yarn and go underneath that. That works too. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to give you that extra little tip on weaving in your ends. All right, so as you're working on this project, you will be working all the way through one motif. Then you'll have a number of rounds where you're just doing some knitting for a while, and that's written in your pattern how many rounds to do. And then you're going to start working from chart number 2. You're going to work across that, all the same techniques, and then you're going to do a number of rounds at the end. And then you'll just bind off, you can just bind off like all the way around and leave yourself a nice long tail, and then I will show you how to finish up your headbands. So let me just check in here and see if I'm missing any questions. Let's see. Oh, Carol Briggs from Illinois. It's okay if you're late. You can always go back and watch the beginning, whatever you missed later. Let's see, Donatella, hello from Canada, hi. And a hello from North Carolina. A bit late, but I made it. Yay! It's okay to be late. And we've got a hello from Lockhart, Texas. Awesome. You guys are from all over the place. Okay, so I always leave myself really long yarn tails for sewing things up. Maybe you don't need them quite this long, but you're going to need enough so that you can stitch up. You're basically going to be stitching this closed first because I feel like that makes it so much easier to catch all the layers. And then we're going to be sewing it into the ends together in such a way that's going to create that knot. But before you do that, I would recommend blocking your piece. You can see, let me just show you the difference between blocked and unblocked, and hopefully you guys can see. So this is unblocked. I'm going to block this later when I get home, but this is blocked, so it flattens it out a little bit and evens out your stitches a little. When I use these worsted weight yarns and this technique, it can get a little bit bubbly and look a little bit ripply, but once you give that a little bit of steam, or if you do a nice wet block, it's just going to kind of melt into your fabric a little bit more. Maybe you can see if I turn them sideways, maybe you can see the difference, but it does actually make a difference. I always recommend blocking things, but of course, I have no way to enforce that, and you guys have your own minds. But I would say for this project, this is a little more important than just it's not like that important, you're just gonna wear it, but it's a little bit more, it gives you a little more polish, I would say. It's a little bit more noticeable, that's what I meant. If you block your piece, you're gonna notice the difference between unblocked and blocked a little bit more than on some other projects that you might do. Just because those yarns tend to distort things just a little, it makes it a little bit puffier there. So I recommend the blocking. Okay, so now we are going to seam this closed. So I'm just going to flip it over here. So we're going to just do a whip stitch to flatten this out and stitch this together. Now this doesn't have to be perfect or beautiful. I'm just starting here in the middle because that's where my yarn tail is, and I just put it on a yarn needle. This doesn't have to be perfect or amazing. You don't have to get every stitch just right, but just make sure when you start this that you are, that this motif is actually centered. Take a look at how many stitches are over here versus over here. Make sure it's nice and flat before you stitch it shut, because you don't want to stitch it, at a weird angle here and turn it over and have it be just off center. So here we go. So I'm just going to be doing some whip stitches this way, and I'm going to turn around and go back the other way. And these are all going to be hidden because we're going to be sewing all the layers together here. Like the layers, these 2 layers plus the other 2 layers when we're making that knot. So you don't need to worry about this being absolutely perfect and flawless here. This is not a time that you need to be super, super careful. Okay, I'm just sending my needle through just to get back to where I had started. Let's see, that seems long enough. So I'm going to weave in this end because I don't need my yarn tail anymore. I'm just going to kind of tuck that in there. And cut that off. And then we're going to do the same thing with this side. Just make sure you've got the same amount of stitches here as here. That's all flattened. And we're going to go ahead and do a whip stitch across. Again, does not need to be the neatest does not need to be the neatest stitching you ever did because it's not going to show later. I'm going to turn this around, just slide my needle through. I'm just catching some of those stitches on my way. And I'm going to whip stitch the rest of this. This would be a little bit easier if I had blocked this as well because it tends to want to curl just a bit. Okay, so now that we have both edges stitched closed, we're going to lay this on the table with the russamine side up. Okay, so right there. Then we're going to bring each of the edges towards each other, and we're going to create a C and a backward C with our hands. Okay, so we've just got those two edges, and now we're going to interlink them. So this corner right here, I'm going to put it right there, right in the middle of that fold. So we just bring them together like this. And so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers, which actually really are doubled because we stitched them closed. So it's a lot of thickness to go through. But you need to make sure you're catching every single layer here. I'm going to turn this just slightly so I can stitch a little easier. So we're going to, so this is attached right here to this corner. So I'm going to just kind of go through there, going up through this corner. And we didn't catch this layer yet, so I'm going to go all the way back through. So we're going through all 4 layers here, okay? Make sure that doesn't disappear. And just kind of keep your eye on all of them. And I like to just do a whip stitch here. So I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4 layers and pull that nice and tight. If your main color yarn is not a very strong yarn, you may want to do this seaming with another yarn that's very similar in color but a little bit stronger because it's so thick, and it really does help if you can pull on it pretty tightly to kind of squish down that thickness here. All right, we are almost done with this project, so let me know if you guys have any remaining questions. Oh, we've got Dawn says late, but we'll rewatch from 17F Republic, Washington. Is that the temperature? 17 Fahrenheit? I'm not sure what the 17F is. Let me know, Dawn. It's cold here too, as I know it is around a lot of areas in the United States right now. And lots of people are snowed in, I think. But knitting is a good cozy activity. So I'm just kind of going back in the opposite direction, just in case I missed a little section or anything. It just makes it a little sturdier. And then now I'm going to go ahead and actually it's a good idea to look at your piece if you're not sure if you grabbed all of those layers before you weave in your ends, but I know I grabbed them all, so I'm going to go ahead and just weave in my end back and forth. Again, this does kind of help having a sharper needle here because you can go through more layers a little bit easier. All right, and now we can turn it around so that you guys can see what we just did. So that made that really cute little knot like that. And then I would give it a little shot of steam or wet block it at this point. You don't have to, but it just helps this lay a little bit flatter here if that's something that's important to you. But you can see we have such a cute little headband with those just beautiful motifs. This is, I kind of designed this. I feel like we need a little more love around here lately. And I wanted to do like a nice little project for you guys for Valentine's Day as we make a really good Valentine's Day gift. So, oh yes, the temperature, 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Woo, Dawn. I hope you're staying warm. All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining me. If anybody is a crocheter and interested in learning how to make a little heart zippered pouch for Valentine's Day, I'm gonna be teaching that in about 20 minutes on the Creative Crochet Corner website. So yeah, if you're around and you're able to watch, I hope you meet me over there. All right, thanks you guys so much for joining me. Bye, everyone.